Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. So, here's where we're at. In our last episode, we started our examination of the Grateful Dead's incredible and frankly underrated studio discography by focusing on their Warner Brothers years, essentially the years spanning 1967 to 1970. While some of those records stand to this day as some of the best rock albums of all time, the decade of the 1970s saw the Dead explore a variety of styles, sounds, and even genres one would not associate with the band. With their dedicated fandom of Deadheads growing to numbers and levels of obsession previously unheard of for a cult rock band, the band's sound had to expand in proportion to the sports arenas and large open-air settings they were now playing in. And the studio albums they put out in this period surely did not disappoint in that regard. Some of the band's most enduringly popular, influential, and classic songs came from the period of 1973 to 1980. And it's about time a music podcast shined a light on this material. Welcome to the second of our two-part retrospective, The Grateful Dead in the Studio, A Legacy.
In the last episode and in the first part of this series, we left off at the height of the Dancing Bear, namely trucking. And so what happened afterwards and what happened during the 70s? That's what we'll be covering in this episode. Really, really fascinating stuff. Dead from all the way through to 1980. Should be good, right?
Oh, yeah. 70s Dead. So, I mean, some of their greatest, most iconic songs came from this period. People think of the Dead as a 60s band, but really, like, the bulk of their great stuff came out in the 70s.
Oh yeah, and well, as we'll get into, maybe there were diminishing returns. Like they weren't as consistent by the end, but they were still working to not maybe innovate, but they were working to find new ground and to, they never lost that spirit. They could have phoned it in, but they didn't. Yeah. So that's pretty cool.
Even at their worst, they were still writing some great songs that came out. They could not totally suck even if they wanted to.
No. There's a lot of bands like that. It's I mean, they never really got to the Bob Dylan level where, they were even in the 80s, every one of those 80s records from Dylan had one good song on them.
Yeah.
There were about 3 or 4 that had only one good song on them.
Yeah.
But at least they had the good song. The Dead never sunk to that level. So
Anyway,
how you been, man?
Good. I'm good. I'm ready to finish off this series on the Dead. And, yeah, for some reason, the Dead have gotten me into a Sun Ra trip lately. It's really weird.
yeah. I've seen Sun Ra's come up in a few instances. Actually, I believe I just saw a thing on Spin, Kurt Vile, and what he's vibing on recently. Yeah. And I think Sun Ra was one of the 5 records. So
right.
Go figure. And a little bit of music news I saw this week, and I figured he's one of your favorite guys. So I figured I'll run this past you. Win Butler is in a lot of trouble. Arcade Fire. He is turns out to be a serial sexual harasser / abuser, and there was an article, I think Pitchfork or one of those. There was an article, one of those triggering articles of women revealing some of the crazy shit that Mr. Butler allegedly did.
Why am I not surprised? I've always felt the Arcade Farce were just a freaking phony baloney band of pretentious indie twats. And now I know Win Butler fits the profile.
Okay, well, I just wanted to bring that up and figured get your reaction. And just so everyone knows, in the parallel universe, there's no such thing as sexual harassment, and there's no such thing as Me Too, and everything is wonderful over here, including the rock and roll and the music that is up on the pedestal and is widely revered. So that is our concept for the parallel universe. As longtime listeners will know, every one of these episodes, Arturo and I talk about an album on this side of the space-time continuum, in which, over the last few months, we've established there is a vault in the parallel universe, and in the vault, it's basically our treasure trove of albums of recent vintage, which we define as within the last decade. And so, for Arturo's pick this week, you're going into the vault this week, and got to say the guy who made the record that you're covering, if there was a let's say if there was a picture or if there was a cover model for the parallel vault,
Yeah.
this dude's picture would probably be on it. And we're saying that about, and you'll be covering a record. I guess it's fair to say maybe it's like minor phosphorescent, or maybe it's like the third of three great records. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe you
it is.
disagree.
Well, it's still a fantastic record. And I'm
Sure.
talking about, Phosphorescent and their album from 2018, C'est la vie. Now, since 2003, Phosphorescent has been the one-man musical project of the Huntsville, Alabama native Matthew Hoke. And just to prove that you can take the Southern boy out of the South, but never the South out of the Southern boy, he started Phosphorescent in Atlanta and now resides in good old Nashville.
Yep.
So, and in keeping with Southern tradition, Hoke's music generally rides the rails where country rock and folk rock cross tracks, but see those traditions upended with liberal doses of electronic beats, spacey psychedelia, tasteful synthesizer washes, and heavy, slow churning electric guitar workouts. Basically, imagine my morning jacket without the tendency to seriously rock out.
There you go.
Normally, I would criticize this, but most of Phosphorescent songs don't lend themselves to bombast. A sadness and a yearning permeates through most of Matthew Hoke's work. And at its best, it evokes the beautiful dolefulness of Townes Van Zandt, albeit if Van Zandt grew up listening to Neil Young, Graham Parsons, and Will Oldham. The critical breakthrough for Phosphorescent came with 2010's Here's to Taking It Easy, an album of such sheer perfection that I personally rank it as one of the 10 greatest country rock albums of all time. A lengthy vault segment on this album in store, hint, hint. In 2013, Hoke had a near commercial breakthrough with the album Muchacho, a record that saw him expand his palette of country rock / folk rock fusion and the aforementioned electronica and psychedelia, yet tastefully done so the sonics didn't overwhelm the songwriting. 5 years later, sobriety and marriage with kids seem to have tempered and soothed Matthew Hoke's soul, as Phosphorescent's 2018 album, C'est la vie, is lyrically an album brimming with acceptance, wistful resignation, and a bittersweet contentment that his previous albums notably lacked. Yes, listeners, you out there who actually checked out Chris and my parallel vault recommendations from last week are being gifted with, at least on my part, a somewhat happy album.
And that's a good point, actually. Like, he's this type of artist. There's a few guys like him. I think, like, guys like the War on Drugs and a few other bands out there that, because they're, they go from their mid 20s, then to their early 30s, then mid 30s, then approaching 40s. It's kind of cool to see where they are in 4 years. And so it's their talent, and it reflects where they are now and how they're translating it. So yeah, no, this is neat. I agree with you. This is a very content record, but it's steeped in realism and wisdom. It's not this sort of idealistic content and everything's great now. I think that there's, he makes it clear that it's earned and it's not permanent for sure. I in terms of what there's a term that gets used a lot on. I guess some folks used it like we used it like with in one of our episodes in the fourth golden age where we talk about the bedroom folk, like back in bedroom folk. Well, in terms of bedroom folk, this guy he's always been, even back to 2010, his bedroom folk, as in the literal bedroom folk, has always been really more beautiful and almost like kind of otherworldly, and I think that sticks here. I hear a lot of Springsteen. My favorite song on this record is "There From Here," and I think there's a little bit of Springsteen in there. I think that he's got that that sort of folk rock uh, sort of vocabulary that even goes there a little bit. I don't know if you hear that, but that's kind of. Oh yeah, well Neil Young for sure. Yeah, definitely Neil Young and definitely Graham Parsons. I think are the most obvious, like the most sleeve worthy influences. But the California stuff too, like you made reference to as well. So just the way he's able to get that pop sensibility with that pure sort of country aesthetic, and like you said, but not phony, is just awesome to me. And so, yeah, I mean, this might be his third best record, but that's still pretty fucking good. So yeah, as we're wont to do, I'm going complete opposite, and I guess you can call this a little bit of cheating. I'm doing, or I'll be talking about a new album by RZA. A lot of you have probably know of RZA, but he's freed up, and we'll talk a little bit about this here in a minute. But he's pretty much freed up from his Wu Tang. He's not tied down by that, so he gets to kind of experiment a little more than he would have 15 years ago or so. And so now he's now co-writing graphic novels, and which means he's now writing the scores or the accompanying soundtrack to graphic novels. And so he released. Folks may remember, and I'll set this up. So RZA. A lot of you will know him as the mastermind and the mad genius behind the Wu-Tang Clan. Although I don't know, it just seems like, at least in this country, the vibe I get is that most people under 35 years old could care less about the Wu-Tang, or it's. Yeah, I mean, 97 was their MTV moment. And so there was this period between 93 and 97 where like Wu Tang pretty much revolutionized things. And it was weird music, but it was weird music done wonderfully well. And RZA was the resident weirdo. So, like I said, Wu Tang means a lot to our group. There's men of a certain age, and we're basically that age, anywhere between like 55 and like 43 or whatever. So, RZA means a lot to us, might not mean a whole lot to younger folks. And so, because of that, he gets to kind of fly under the radar. And so, he's now back to his Bobby Digital persona. This is why I'm setting this up. And so during oh yeah, that's a good record. Well, yeah, I mean, of his solo stuff, I mean, well, that and the Ghost Dog soundtrack, I think, are the two best things he ever did. And so, in the midst of all this, just to set this up, so when he's cranking out all these genius records by Raekwon and Ghostface and Jizza and ODB, yeah, yeah, and all these classic records there, after Enter the Woo, which is '93. He as a vanity project for himself, he came up with this shtick where he called his name is Robert Diggs, Bobby Diggs, and so he came up with the persona of Bobby Digital, which is basically he's a futuristic existential comic book superhero from the ghetto, and partying, and basically it's like RZA gets to talk about his wild and outside from his younger days, but in the guise of sort of comic book references. And so what it allowed him to do, it was kind of neat because a lot of the Wu-Tang stuff is built on samurai movie references and mobster movies. So a lot of Scarface and a lot of a lot of Shaw Brothers. Well, RZA's nerddom goes deeper. And so, he's big comic book guy. He's big spaghetti westerns, grindhouse art films, European art, and all of his other influences. So he was able to draw on all of that for this sort of moodier, weirder, more reverent sort of 70s cinematic uh, palette. And so he was able to play around with some of that, with some very amusing stuff, by the way, on Bobby Digital and Stereo. And so he's revisited the Bobby Digital persona off and on over the last couple of decades. Well, now he's come back to it because he's now exploring graphic novels. And so last month he released this thing. It is Bobby Digital and the Pit of Snakes is what this is called. And he has this 8-song, 30-minute album accompaniment to it. Now, I haven't read the graphic novel, but I want to. Why? Because here is the description from the publisher, and this is great. Quote, "Who are you? What is real? This is the question Bobby Digital is seeking to answer. Embracing his id, ego, and superego, he embarks on a quest to figure out the nature of his reality and himself. He will be ambushed by enemies unknown. He will be tried in ways most men cannot endure. Will he be victorious? Most of all, will he survive the pit of snakes?" Yeah, man, fucking rad, yo. Haven't read it, but that sure makes me want to. And so, springing from that, he gets this little, like I said, 30-minute, 8-song record. Bobby Digital presents the Pit of Snakes, and it's really, like I said, it's basically everything outside of his kung fu and mafia musical palette is kind of on here, and there's some really great stuff. It's almost done as kind of a mid-tempo, kind of slow to mid-tempo Western. And so there's a lot, it's not so much rapping, because, RZA used to rap like a crackhead. But obviously he's calmed down in his old age. So it's more like sort of spoken word, speak sing these days. And so, so this, some of the highlights, it starts off with this song called Under the Sun, which is very, very spaghetti Western, to the point where you can almost, hear the, hear the Morricone in the mix. Very acoustic, and kind of this is the origin story. Bobby Digital reborn as kind of a steampunk futuristic cowboy. It's really goofy shit, but it's fun. And then he hits on some blaxploitation, Smokey Blues House with Troubleshooting. He has a song called Celebrate Life, which it's, if it was early 70s and it had flutes and congas in it, that's his influence. Gil Scott-Heron, Mayfield, Marvin Gaye, all of those kinds of things. And then my favorite thing on this, and anybody my age who was a big hip hop head in the 90s will love this, it is the return of horrorcore with the song We Push. RZA and Prince Paul, once upon a time, and I know you know this record, Arturo, they collaborated as a band called Gravediggers, and basically invented this idea of horrorcore, which is like, it's what it sounds like. It's like all these sort of, you get those it's kind of spooky witch-like harmony singings, and the the organ, like worthy of Frankenstein monster movies from the 20s, and all this other stuff. And then with all this rapping about all this sort of crazy, we'll eat your heart out kind of stuff. Strange but true. The original title of that Gravediggers record from 1994 that they submitted, and I won't say the real word, but it was N Mortis. So instead of rigor mortis, yeah, which would have been the funniest album title of all time. But obviously it got turned down. So so RZA he's going back to the future with that. So good little listen. So Art, what do you think about this Bobby Digital record?
Yeah, normally I'm a big fan of a lot of what RZA does, actually. I'm partial, like you said, the Ghost Dog soundtrack from 2000. Is it 99 or 2000? I think it was 2000.
2000, yeah.
2000, yeah. That to me is one of the best hip hop albums of the decade. And my favorite of his Bobby Digital stuff is the Digital Bullet album from '01.
That's fun.
I love that record. This one I think is more interesting than it is good. It's kind of a soundscape record more than anything.
Yeah.
It's interesting in that way, and I kind of admire it in that way. But it's most definitely a soundtrack record. It's enjoyable, but it's not one that I'll go back to.
Yeah, and well, it's one of those things. It's kind of like if you're like cleaning up your office and you just kind of need kind of mood music or driving
Sure,
music or whatever. I think
sure,
it's meant to be. To me, it's meant to be consumed as one piece. I think if as a standalone song, maybe "We Push," the horrorcore
yeah,
song, maybe
yeah,
that works standalone. But I think it's like you said, it's meant to be a soundscape. And again, it's. I think it's conceived as a soundtrack to this graphic novel,
right,
and it pretty much you could it this is the guy that curated the soundtrack to the Kill Bill movies. Gee, you
sure.
think? As we mentioned a few minutes ago, the rock and roll podcast space is replete with shows dedicated to the majesty of the Grateful Dead, created with the kind of dedication and granularity that we only kinda sorta approach here. Kinda sorta, of course, is pretty generous, but work with us. It's pretty cool to dig around for what's out there to learn all about the amazing mythology and history of the band, and especially about the miles and miles and miles of live show tapes for old heads and newbies to explore alike. We just wanted to take a moment here to give a shout out to some of the best of these Grateful Dead oriented podcasts: The Dead Pod, Dead and Gone, Working Man's Pod, No Simple Road, Code Names, Dead Show of the Month, Help on the Way, and we certainly must not leave out the official Grateful Dead podcast, Good Old Grateful Deadcast. It is an honor to be part of this wider rock and roll podcast community. Everyone in it teaches us just so much, and these podcasts that dissect and deify the Grateful Dead are among the best of the bunch. Check them out where you check out all of the other podcasts.
Okay, so where are we? We left off in 1970 after the Dead released their masterpiece duo records, right? And the single biggest development in the Grateful Dead's career between the release of American Beauty in late 1970, which is where we left off in the last episode, and almost exactly 3 years later can be summed up in one word: Deadheads. This
Yep.
fanatical culture of fandom was unlike anything seen in recent or any music history. Tribes of hippies, druggies, and hardcore rock music aficionados would follow the band around on their nationwide tours. Even more impressively, every tour stop the Dead made would turn out new hippies, new freaks, and new Deadhead converts. Long before the internet era and the ensuing era of blogs and social media, Deadheads were united and connected via the band's very own print newsletter that increased its membership by thousands year after year. And of course, no mention of Deadheads is complete without noting what the parking lots of Grateful Dead concert venues became,
Oh
which
yeah.
were emporiums for a burgeoning and conspicuous drug trade of all kinds of drugs.
Oh yeah. Oh
Uh,
yeah.
the 1960s may have ended, but it was clear that huge swaths of the population weren't ready for the freewheeling, free loving, and free living spirit of that decade to deteriorate. And whether they intended to or not, no American band remained truer to that spirit and came to embody it more than the Grateful Dead. This would
Yeah.
remain so for the next 20 plus years. For the members of the Dead themselves, this stunning turn of fortune was startling, to say the least. They went from being a moderately successful hippie rock band with some considerable critical acclaim to being one of America's biggest concert attractions, selling out sports arenas and large outdoor venues all throughout the country. They went from being a few $1 million in debt to their record label, Warner Brothers, and having a large chunk of their money stolen by their
Yep.
former manager and former drummer Mickey Hart's father, to each member becoming considerably wealthy. This newfound success and status as a genuine industry within the music industry empowered the band to no ambitious end. And after they mutually parted ways with Warner Brothers, they felt confident enough to stick to their independent counterculture guns and form their own record label and distribute their own records. This, of course, would lead to a disastrous outcome for the band. Right, Chris?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. So when they they do their independent label, and again, they do the few records. Now at this point, by 73, 74, as you mentioned, they had basically formed Dead Inc., Dead, comma Inc., and had, again, this thing had grown, and so now, by certainly starting in 73 and most definitely by 77, they are probably raking in as much revenue from touring as any band in the world, or certainly
Yeah.
in the U.S. And so, kind of like other bands of that ilk, that kind of
Yeah.
that make their whole reputation, or that there's kind of this never-ending rolling show. The new output, in a lot of ways, doesn't matter, because you could come out with the shittiest stuff imaginable. I mean, you can
Yeah.
sound, you could basically make like Metal Machine Music parts 5, 6, 7, and 8,
Yeah.
and yeah, you're still gonna sell those tickets. And so
Yeah.
maybe folks are like, maybe we don't have the incentive to be good or to be innovative.
Right. Right.
That never happened to the Dead, as we're
Yeah.
going to talk about here in a bit. And so as they're growing, they have these complexities, the relationships, the drugs, which obviously was an issue. Through all of that, they figured out, through all of these records we're going to talk about, even the ones at the end, which obviously there were diminishing returns. Those aren't anywhere near as good as the ones in the front of this list. Even so, those records cranked out what became touring favorites all through the 80s. And when they had their MTV moment in 1987, when Touch of Grey went into heavy rotation on MTV, at that time, a couple of the songs from those late records were probably the fan favorite moments of each show.
Yeah.
And we'll mention the specific songs when we go here. So, but that's something to keep in mind, that they could have absolutely phoned it in. Well, they did once, but they could have phoned it in over and over and over again. Probably starting in 74, they didn't,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that's to be admired for
Right.
sure.
Okay, and also one little thing to note, that in between 1970 and 73, there was a little thing called a Jerry Garcia solo album.
Yeah,
I think it was called self-titled Jerry Garcia. Is that what it was called?
yeah, yeah. Basically, I think it's just called Garcia, uh,
Oh,
as far as I know. But it's his solo record. It's not quite self-titled. I think it's just called Garcia. And so this is 1972. It's important to talk about this record, because it is, this is Garcia. While there was this 2.5 year gap between American Beauty and then their next formal record release in 73, Garcia went to the studio and he made this record. And all of these songs had been written. I don't think there's much in the way of new material that made it on here, but he
right.
cranked out a solo record,
Mhm.
and it's a bridge. It's basically, it was where they had been, and so it kind of notes where they had been, and it kind of gives a preview of where they're going. I think it's Garcia and Hunter in a growth phase. And so, yes, one of the songs on this is "To Lay Me Down," which,
Mhm.
incredibly, in the course of researching for this series, I learned from several sources that Robert Hunter, the lyricist, and Garcia wrote "Ripple," "Broke Down Palace," and this song "To Lay Me Down" on the same day.
Wow.
And "To Lay Me Down" is a very pretty song. Would not have been out of place on American Beauty. It makes it here. But other than that, I mean, this is a strong record, and it's got about 4 or 5 songs that, leading up to this record, over the couple years before this, had become staples of their shows, and a
Mhm.
couple of songs that never actually dropped off of off the playlists. The main two here are "Deal" and "Sugaree."
Yeah.
Uh, Su-
And Loser.
and Loser, yeah, and The
Yeah.
Wheel.
Yeah.
Those four are really the main, songs from here that they never really fell off. Especially "Sugaree" is one of Garcia's best songs. Probably, I think it's one of his and Hunter's five best songs.
I
Uh,
agree.
you know,
Yeah.
basically any song that slyly and subtly paints
Yeah.
Garcia as having a tryst on the DL
Yeah.
is, gotta
Yeah.
love it. But it just has this, real sway and just this great hook and this, like I said, this great little sly lyric and just good stuff. And really, like The Wheel is one of those. If you deconstruct it, you hear all kinds of little inspirations and like lifts that you can uh, spike into all seven of the records we're going to talk about
Yeah.
for
And
for sure.
couple of things to note. I mentioned the song "Loser." 1 year before Beck made it big with his song "Loser" in 1994, non-related to the Garcia song, the alternative band Cracker covered Jerry Garcia's "Loser" on their 1993 album
Oh yeah,
"Kerosene Hat." So that's something interesting. That of all bands, they're the ones that covered him. That's the album that has the song "Low," which is like their big hit from '93.
yeah. That's a
And
great record.
and
Go ahead.
also during this period, Bob Weir of the Dead put out his solo album in 1972 called Ace. And it's got several songs that were routinely played by the Dead throughout the '70s, playing in the band, Black Throated Wind, Mexicali Blues, and One More Saturday Night. Those all were hardcore Dead staples throughout the
Yep.
'70s and '80s.
Yep, especially Mexicali Blues. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fun stuff. So, yeah, that's a good catch. So you had Garcia and Weir, and so uh, it's kind of strange. Like Weir was the second most prolific songwriter in the band, but was the third best,
Yeah.
which we'll get into here. So so that's really the prelude. So they've gone from being this sort of cult undergroundish band to now like big business, and they're going to take advantage of that through these records and on their own label, and that's where we're starting here.
And we're starting with the first one from 1973, Wake of the Flood. Now, it's hard for younger listeners to comprehend now that we're living in a time when the importance of a major record label is negligible, thanks to social media exposure provided by outlets such as YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok, and DIY and fan funded websites such as Bandcamp. But one of the great things about being on a major record label during this time is that if you were a recording artist, there were safeguards in place to prevent your album, in this case, the tangible physical media of vinyl records, from being bootlegged and distributed to record stores with drastically inferior sound quality. Yet, this is exactly what happened to the Grateful Dead in their first attempt at being a 100%
Oh,
independent band.
big
Yeah,
shock, you
yeah.
know.
Despite thousands of copies of the album being recalled from the shops, resulting in a serious dent to their wallets and their reputation, the album is actually a stunning beauty of a record and a logical extension of the ground they broke on Working Man's Dead and American Beauty. And it possesses some of the band's most treasured songs. This is possibly the most quintessentially Dead-like Dead album in the band's entire discography, in the sense that every style and genre the band had ever incorporated and even would incorporate is either displayed full bore or hinted at on Wake of the Flood. It took a while, but with this album, they finally gained the confidence and momentum to capture the spirit and sound of their live electric shows in polished studio form. This is
Sure.
still, in my opinion, this is still the best and most consistent album of the streak of albums we're talking about in this episode, with its only flaw being in the sequencing. A few too many slow tracks put in succession that slightly dilute the impact and power of the songs. But that's the only flaw. My standout tracks, Road Jimmy, demonstrates the group's mastery of languid hymnal ballads with Keith Gotcho's electric piano slowly guiding underneath his then wife Donna Gachos and Jerry Garcia's stately vocals. And then, of course, there's the quintessential summertime, groovy, mid-tempo, glistening, Grateful Dead jam, Eyes of the World, with perhaps the most delightfully Jerry Garcia-esque Jerry Garcia guitar solo ever.
Oh yeah.
When bands and artists try to emulate Garcia's guitar style, this is one of the tracks that surely comes up.
Oh, absolutely. This is one of the main ones
Yeah,
for sure. Worth mentioning on Row Jimmy.
yeah,
You get the but reggae influences
yeah,
show up in this
sure,
streak, and so these
sure.
sort of and I think that comes from Keith Gacho. Because you got to
Mm,
remember, this is Gacho's first record. Ron
yeah,
McKernan Pigpen had died of complications from alcoholism
yeah,
between American Beauty and here. And so Gacho has much more of a jazz like background. And so
yeah,
he's I think he's more eclectic and more sort of out there. And
right.
so I think that some of that is demonstrated. Like I said, Eyes of the World. Uh, Again, I think another one of those top 10 Hunter Garcia songs of all
Yeah,
time. Another one of those is on this record too,
yeah,
which I actually would put as it's not my favorite Garcia Hunter, and we'll get to that in a bit. It might be the best Garcia Hunter song,
mm,
Stella Blue. Uh, Stella Blue is this incredible soul ballad. I don't know what you would call it. It's almost like it's Garcia as just sort of singing his heart out, literally.
yeah,
That he is able to embody the ache of Robert Hunter's lyrics. It's a boulevard of broken dreams elegy.
yeah,
This sort of my heart's been left on the strip imagery, and with
right.
Garcia singing that so convincingly and so heartachingly. Uh, the amazing thing is Hunter was what 31, 32 when he wrote that song,
Yeah,
which is kind of amazing because I
yeah,
mean, how many lives had that guy actually lived by then? And apparently, quite a few. To
yeah,
be able to capture that, I did read an interview uh, about this and I think it's a Rolling Stone piece where Garcia said at some point in the late '80s that yeah, at the time when he was singing it, he wasn't quite grasping what he was singing. It's like, okay, that's cool, and that sounds good, and I can run with that. And he said it wasn't until right about then, when he was in his 40s, probably around the time he had his diabetic coma, that
yeah,
that whole idea of loss and mortality and everything that's reflected in that song kind of hit him. And so
yeah,
that's what I'm saying. There's just a wisdom and a beauty there that is just pretty incredible. And so yeah, great album. Also, strange but true. This album greatly outsold American Beauty.
yeah,
This was their first top 20 record in
yeah.
America.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wake of the it was the next few albums actually sold really well, as far for Dead standards, and the next one after Wake of the Flood came out in 1974 from the Mars Hotel. Now, after the distribution disaster, let's put it that way, of
Yes.
Wake of the Flood, the Grateful Dead decided to play ball with the man for a little bit and signed a distribution deal with the major label United Artists. The band would fund the recording and production of their music, and UA would handle the manufacturing and distribution of the records. Now, while not a perfect album, the wealth of amazing and iconic Dead songs makes it a classic record in its own right. Interestingly enough, this is the album that preceded the tour that would be their final one before their touring hiatus that would last nearly 2 years. Now, my standout tracks, while I would love to wax rhapsodically about Ship of Fools, a gorgeous companion piece to Row Jimmy that shows off Jerry Garcia's penchant for penning songs that approximate the hymnal quality of gospel ballads. It's his rockers that resonate the most. US Blues, another in a long line of iconic 1970s Dead songs that would become concert staples, is an almost glam rock stomper that shows lyricist Robert Hunter at his most lyrically wry, using classic American symbol tropes Uncle Sam mentioned multiple times, and a deceptive wave that flag round and round chorus to underscore a sardonic take on how overbearing American society can be. The best song on the album, however, to me is Scarlet Begonias, with its spiky time signature showcasing how drummer Bill Kreutzmann can write a song in the most unconventional of ways with his jazz background. And then there's Garcia's mesmerizingly angular riff with its complementary lead lines that stands as some of the greatest among dozens and dozens of examples, among the greatest guitar work he ever put on tape. Highlight of this song, in my opinion, Donna Godchaux's wordless vocals on the outro, with husband Keith's writing of the harpsichord, making it sound
Yeah.
unnaturally funky.
Yeah, and the funny thing is Mickey Hart is not in the band at this point, and it's like one of the
Yeah,
most Mickey Hart sounding things in the entire band that
yeah.
catalog is that outro. Yeah, those are this album. This is the best of the records of this period that we're talking about. I think overall, Bob.
Second best to me after
Yeah,
Wake Up Blood.
yeah, it's close. And remember that we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but there's a difference for me always between best and favorite.
Right.
The only kind of misfire on this record is Bob Weir's "Money, Money,"
Oh my
which
God. With the
which
misogynist lyrics.
yeah, which they're so kind of scuzzy that they actually even in 1974 those guys were like, whoa, we can't be singing that,
Yeah.
and so they kind of killed that. But other than that, I think it's a terrific record. It's real diversity, and like I said, Scarlet Begonias, and so it's like Loose Lucy, which is fantastic. Love
Yeah.
that song. It's great. It's a great party song. Great little electronic piano. Great kind of fun harmonies on that. But the two songs that make this one stand out to me were both written by Phil Lesh.
Mm.
And Lesh, he doesn't get enough credit. Lesh is, like we established on the last episode, classically trained musician who had never played bass in his life before he joined this band, and actually plays bass like a guy who just is discovering the bass. And I don't care about a pocket; it can do this. And so you get licks like some of the stuff we talked about before, "Addicts of My Life," that kind of like beautiful, bass as soul lifter. Well, he does that here He does it here in a tremendous song called "Unbroken Chain,"
Mm.
which is just a 7-minute, just beautiful, just beautiful melodies, beautiful arrangement. Sprinkling piano notes, really subtle lead lines. Nothing too flashy from Garcia. Just very subtle, very nice. I will say this, and would you agree with me, Arturo, with this statement? At about the 2-minute mark, between the 2-minute mark and the 5-minute mark, can you hear Fish being either conceived or artificially inseminated? We're talking about the band Fish.
Perhaps. I always said the Fish was inseminated with the prog rock band Yes in their song "Long Distance Turnaround." The Fish in the second half of that song. That sounds
that's
a
one of
lot
them.
like Fish.
Yeah, that is one of them. But I just think that if you look at the early part of Fish's catalog, some of the stuff that's in the middle of Unbroken Chain was a trope that Anastasio kind of leaned on. It was kind of like a one of their default bridges, for sure. Like the Junta era
Yeah.
of Fish, and then so there's that from Lesh, and then there's the other song which is called "The Pride of Cucamonga," and
I think this is a much better song. It proves that Lesh was at his best doing country rock.
oh yeah, I mean I like, but here's the thing. So when they were making American Beauty in 1970, Garcia especially was heavily influenced at that time by the Bakersfield country scene, Bakersfield,
Right.
California. This is Buck Owens and Merle Haggard most famously. There's a sound there, very pedal steel and very kind of jolly, but also satirical. And so Lesh is able to step into that. It's not Garcia on pedal steel. It's a buddy of his that's playing pedal steel on this. So that's a bit of trivia. But it's basically it's a happy-go-lucky, I'm a trucker in the desert, in the mythical Desert West song. It's a trucker song.
Yeah.
And Lesh does it really well. It's a very orthodox Bakersfield style trucker song. And
Yeah.
so he does that. So those I think are, to me, besides Scarlet Begonias, those two are kind of the standout tracks of this record. Really strong, very really diverse record. Only 8 songs. I mean, that's the amazing thing too. It's so efficient and so dense. You don't
Mm.
realize that, like, wait, that's only 8 songs. So
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
good, really
Yeah.
really good. And the whole Uncle Sam as Jack the Ripper thing is pretty cool too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, taking great classic lyrical tropes and upending them.
True
For all you
enough.
listeners out there, we mentioned about the awful misogynist Bob Weir song "Money Money." Just to let you know, Bob Weir did not write his lyrics. Like just like Jerry Garcia had
Right.
Robert Hunter to write his lyrics, Bob Weir had his buddy John Barlow write
Yeah.
all the lyrics for him. And just to give you an idea of why the rest of the Grateful Dead decided not to play this song live anymore. Here's a sample of the lyric. Lord made a lady, the Lord made a lady out of Adam's rib. Next thing you know, you got women's lib. Lovely to look upon, heaven to touch. It's a real shame they've got to cost so much. Yikes.
Yeah, booga booga. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. Way to go there, Mr. Barlow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but hey,
Yeah.
even in 1974, they caught themselves.
Right. Good for
So
them.
no, yeah, no, they were their own cancel culture.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there you go.
Women like the Grateful Dead too, you know.
Yep. But
Yeah.
as we'll now segue into, Bob Weir makes up for that and then some on this record we're going to talk about now.
Right.
My favorite, my absolute favorite Dead record, over and above all of them. Uh, you know, Arturo, you know me. It's
Yeah.
pretty obvious that and records like this speak to my soul. So
Yes.
tell us about
That
Blues
is
Frava.
that is Blues for Allah from 1975. It was their second album in their distribution deal with United Artists, and it was the one that benefited the most from their nearly 2-year hiatus as the Dead sharpened their musicianship and attacked their new material with a newfound gusto, which is saying something considering the excellent quality of the previous 2 albums. Blues for Allah contains some of the group's most complex and sophisticated work. Indeed, out of the many facets and aspects of the band's music, this album is the purest example of what I'll call prog rock Dead. This did come out in 1975, after all, which was the very peak and almost the end of the British prog rock movement and progressive rock movement embodied by bands such as Yes, King Crimson, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. This record sounds a lot like the Dead were trying to compete with the virtuosity of those aforementioned bands. And while there are some interesting sounds throughout the second half of the album, it's Blues for Allah's opening trio of songs, the first half of the album, really, side A of songs, that stands out the most as the most musically interesting, engaging, original, and best written material on the album. My standout tracks: the opening suite of Help on the Way, Slipknot, which recalls the burgeoning jazz rock sophistication of Steely Dan before the latter band drifted into overly slick, polished AM radio mediocrity. But don't let that description fool you. Just like Steely Dan were a great band before they descended into schmaltz, this track shows the Dead could do creamy, dreamy, decadent, slyly complex 1970s rock with the best of any of the bands of that time. This is all before it slows down to mid-tempo for Jerry Garcia's mind-melting guitar solo. And this is before it returns to the naughty noodling of the track's beginning, before it segues into lightly syncopated soft funk of the majestic Franklin's Tower, with a guitar line that evokes the vocal chorus of Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side. Franklin's Tower is a masterpiece of danceable, controlled groove that somehow glides with an airiness and a gentleness. And some of Robert Hunter's prettiest, most inspiring lyrics sung by Garcia with the utmost soul and sympathy. It gets my vote for one of the 10 greatest Dead songs ever, quite possibly my favorite Grateful Dead song ever. The Latin jazz flavor of fellow San Franciscan Santana must not have been far from Phil Lesh's mind when he brought in the restless, manic King Solomon's marbles, while Garcia's insanely naughty lead guitar lines and Keith Gotcho's groovy keyboard runs dominate the forefront. It's the drumming combination of Bill Kreutzmann and Mickey Hart. Yes, Mickey Hart was back in the band at this point. That is the hero of this album, particularly Blues for Allah's explosive and extraordinary first half.
Yeah, this album to me is extraordinary. So as you said, this was an album they were in on their hiatus from the road, and this was recorded at Bob Weir's personal studio in and around. I think it was right in San Francisco, and they came in with no. I think the only thing that was written when they came in was either "Help on the Way" or "Crazy Fingers," one of the Garcia Hunter songs. Everything else was written there, and I think that was on purpose because I think Garcia was trying to challenge Weir, at least Weir, to go come out of your comfort zone and let's see where we can go. And so that I think this record has a spirit and it's the most boundaryless record that the Dead ever did, and that actually includes second most Anthem of the Sun. But okay, let me repeat. This is the most boundaryless record with real songs on it. As opposed to Anthem of the Sun. And so there's an adventurousness here. Garcia, even though he's known as a guitar maestro, he was not really a soloist on tape, on record. And so there's not a whole lot of these sort of feature spotlighted guitar solo workouts. Slipknot is that where he gets to show what he can do, really. And that is just incredible. It's got that razor burn, that tone that he could get, like the bottom end of his tone. So that, like you said, that whole "Help on the Way," which I never thought of it as jazz rock, but it has that kind of almost kind of like Batman, kind of almost like that little dun dun, the sort of like little Broadway touches. It's a very sly song there, and how it just sort of seamlessly switches into Slipknot, and then Slipknot seamlessly goes into Franklin's Tower. That's beautiful. King Solomon's Marbles. This is where Keith Gotcho was, that's his finest moment. The fact that Phil Lesh was involved in that too, that he started it, because obviously Mickey Hart's involved in it, right? But then you have Gotcho. And then the second half of the record, now Blues for Allah, which is the title suite, that was written in honor of King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, who had just died. And so basically it's an elegy for, the Sunni, the dark Sunni prince of the Middle East. Go figure. And so it's my favorite record because of it's got that free spirit and it's got that eclecticism, and it just has this sort of these magic touches to it. And the one thing to mention about this record that we need to talk about, Bob Weir. Weir gets a lot of flack, and probably deservedly so, because obviously he's most well known for co-writing those couple of hits from American Beauty, Truckin' and Sugar Magnolia. But he, Wake of the Flood ends with this pretty much Dead by Numbers suite at the end. The weather report,
which I really like, actually.
Yeah, it's actually really good, but it's Dead by Numbers, and so it's not necessarily something that you would say, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's great." It's not really hugely standout. So that was before Blues for Allah, and then obviously Money Money. After Blues for Allah, Weir, they basically kind of leaned on Weir to kind of help him survive. When Garcia was running low on inspiration, that Weir had to come up with these. Weir had this thing of wanting to play like an R&B showman,
Yeah.
with the backup singers behind him and doing all this. So he had these kind of, like it was like white boy R&B, and he was really straining. He was really straining to get in touch with his
Yeah.
African American roots, uh, and some of it was painful. Here, and I guess maybe because he was challenged, I think he writes his best song on it that he ever wrote for the band. The music never stopped, which it's just this really strange kind of, the lyrics evoke like an old timey country festival kind of, fair type of thing. But the music has this not quite bluesy and not quite jazzy, but somewhere in the middle. It's like this sort of like this really like kind of laid back little groove that has jazz touches in and out. Keith Godcho features prominently in it. Donna Godcho, this is her finest one of her finest. It's not her finest moment, but one of her stand-up moments is her singing on this, and it's
Yeah.
just a really joyous song. Weir's best accomplishment, The Dead, and then his most surprising contribution. So the prelude to Blues for Allah is probably the sweetest, most sort of classical, most definitely Middle Eastern reverent thing on the record, including anything of Blues for Allah. This little instrumental called Sage and Spirit. You first hear it, it's dominated in the arrangement by, again, it's acoustic guitar and flute. And it's this very exotic little thing. You would think it might be Garcia because obviously he's got talent on loan from God. You would think it's probably Phil Lesh because he's the classically trained guy and has a kind of brain. No, this is from, holy shit, this is from Bob Weir. That, Weir was capable of this kind of stuff, which, was just remarkable to me. And so it's, it's a record that flows. I think it's a record that brings out the best in everybody. It also one last thing. This album also has the best of their phony reggae songs, I think, which is Crazy Fingers,
Oh, I
which,
totally disagree with that. They did much better reggae later on.
well, there was that, and then, well, Row Jimmy. It's between those two. Also worth mentioning that we're at this point now. This is kind of a critical turning point for the band because this record, from the Mars Hotel, that transitioning that to Blues for Allah, this album, Blues for Allah, only has 2 Garcia Hunter songs on it.
Yeah.
And that's the first time that they are not the dominant creative force behind one of their records. Obviously, from Oxomoxoa all the way through Wake of the Flood, it's almost, what is it, like 85% them? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
even from the Mars Hotel, that's mostly them. It's like 5 out of the 8 songs, I believe, are them. And so you start to see their output dwindle. And I think that pretty much sets up the rest of the story from here. Any other thoughts on
Yeah.
Blues for Allah before we move on?
Yeah, I'm not as enamored with the Bob Weir stuff on the second half as you are. I think they're actually kind of mediocre. They're a bit airy-fairy for my personal taste. I think he's stretching himself, which is good. But just because you're trying something new and different doesn't mean it's automatically good. And to me, this is one of those moments. But the first half of this album, side A, that I talked about earlier, is utterly fantastic. Some of the best music the Dead ever made. It's more than makes up for anything else on the record. It's your personal favorite album of the Dead. But you know who's not really a big fan of this record?
And I knew you were going there because this is hilarious. Who?
Yes, this is Robert Christgau, the Dean of Music Journalism at least in America, in his 1975 vintage review for the Village Voice. He said, this is what he says, quote, "I've been hypersensitive to this band's virtues for years. This time I find the arch aimlessness of their musical approach neurasthenic." I have no idea what that word means. Neurasthenic, and their general muddle-headedness worthy of Yes or the Strawbs. C-. On this episode, Chris and I completed our 2-part retrospective on the Grateful Dead's brilliant studio albums. For the next episode, Chris and I will pay tribute to the band most responsible for keeping the tradition of jam band culture alive and reinventing it for a new generation of fans by the end of the 20th century. That band, of course, is Phish. Love them or hate them, you have to acknowledge them. Known for their legendarily powerful and virtuosic live shows, their studio discography is much underappreciated. Also, their one-band multi-night festivals were the inspiration for massively popular American festivals of today, such as Coachella and Bonnaroo. Join us next episode for Phish in Defense of a Legacy. All right, the next album, and we're halfway there, is Terrapin Station from 1977. The Grateful Dead were unhappy at this point with the overall sales of their first 3 albums on their own independent label. While all those albums debuted in the top 20 of the Billboard album chart, they reflected the opening week buying power of Deadheads and not much else, as the record soon slipped down the chart. They had a right to be at least a bit unhappy with how United Artists were distributing and promoting them. The 3 albums we've mentioned had some of the best music and most memorable songs of the band's career. In a parallel universe, they would have sold as much as the Eagles. As a result, the band decided to fold their independent label and sign on with Arista Records, the label just started by legendary music biz honcho Clive Davis, who had established his reputation with Columbia Records in the 1960s. Davis's idea to make the Dead's record sales match their status as a supreme concert attraction was to pair them up with Keith Olsen, who had most recently worked on Fleetwood Mac's hugely successful 1975 self-titled album, i.e. the first one with Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. What resulted was the flattest, slickest, most sterilized, overproduced, overpolished turd of a record the Grateful Dead had put out to date. At least the prog rock on Blues for Allah had some bite and soul to it and some inspiration. On Terrapin Station, the band sounds at times tired and lethargic, at other times just confused. If that wasn't bad enough, some of the tracks were buffed with an orchestra string section scored by Paul Buckmaster, the same guy who orchestrated Elton John's records. The Dead with an orchestra? Fuck off. It's telling that Jerry Garcia himself spent a lot of time during the recording of this record out of the studio, working on exhibiting and promoting the upcoming The Grateful Dead movie filmed 3 years before, and touring with his own Jerry Garcia band. He would rather be with the Jerry Garcia band than record this piece of shit, and it shows when on record. My standout tracks, not many, but guess what? Bob Weir to the rescue. The band's much maligned rhythm guitarist and other lead vocalist contributes to what amounts to the only 2 good songs on the album. Estimated Prophet is the band's, in my opinion, second successful recorded foray into reggae, with Garcia adding a weirdly yet seductively muffled wah-wah pedaled guitar throughout the track. And then there's Samson and Delilah, quite possibly the most rocked out, pissed off song about a biblical story in rock history. That's about it for Terrapin Station.
Well, yeah, non-Bob Dylan division, for sure. So, yeah, this record, it's the epitome of it is what it is. Like you said, they were under that pressure from Davis, and it's interesting. Garcia only writes one song. Basically, he writes. So this album ends with a medley. It's basically a 7-part medley that goes on for 16 minutes. I think officially called Terrapin Part 1, and it is so weird. It's interestingly weird that I love the way it gets. The start it gets off to is great, like the sort of the central melody and that, but then it gets proggier and weirder, and then in a couple points just plain old stupider. Uh, the things that make it stand out. One, again, it's Garcia and Hunter's only contribution to the record at all, and it's also Mickey Hart. To clarify one point, Hart was not officially back in the band during the Blues for Allah. He kind of came in and they recruited him, or while he was there, he came by and he helped them work on King Solomon's Marbles. And it was after that they officially let him back in. And so in these last few records we'll be talking about, Hart and Kreutzmann, they got writerly together. And so there are these, the two drummers making these percussion compositions, these like short, basically like 1 minute, 2 minute compositions. This suite is the debut of that. But it also, the sound of it is strange. And again, to your point, they use Keith Olsen, but it's very over-engineered. Like
it's overly produced and too slick. It's too
that's
clean.
What I mean.
Too clean.
I mean, if you're going to produce the Dead, the Dead are like the most sort of ethos musicians. It's like musicians, right? You need a musical producer. You don't need an engineer to produce their records. And it sounds like that because, again, with Terrapin Part 1, and it's kind of the same thing with a couple of the other tracks, like there's just this weird electronic sheen to both Garcia's voice and the guitar to it that it just doesn't, it's like, what in the world? What is that? It doesn't sound like a natural product that could come out of a natural instrument. You know what I mean?
The thing about this record, and I read about this in David Brown's book on the Grateful Dead. Keith Olsen, the Fleetwood Mac guy who produced this record, what he did with Garcia's guitar is that he recorded each note separately and he pieced them together. And that's why it sounds mechanical and robotic. And Garcia hated it. He would complain to Olsen and say, hey, listen, man, I would never play that solo that way. That's not how I would do it ever. And Olsen said, no, trust me, it'll sound good this way. Well, no, it sounded like shit.
But Garcia spoke a language. You know what I mean? Yeah. There was a logic and a syntax. Remember, he's talked about the syntax of music, and you can't do that with a guy who's a linguist. You can't do like clip and paste. And you can't do like alien language, or that just doesn't work. So, and it shows. So, totally. God bless Garcia. And for what it's worth, by the way, so best song on this record is Estimated Profit. You're in trouble when the second best song is from your harmony backup singer. This is Donna Gacio's starring role, a good singer, and it very much is like a sort of that light disco, softcore porn, like exotic pop music of the late 70s.
It's pretty hard. I like that music when I'm watching the Emmanuel series, not when I'm listening to the Grateful Dead. Okay. Now next is Shakedown Street from 1978. Now, this is more like it. Getting Lowell George from the American roots rock band Little Feat to produce this album was a wiser choice and proved to be more sympathetic to the band's eclectic inclinations. And this is indeed one of the Dead's most boldly eclectic records. Disco, reggae, and African rhythms sprinkle much of the music. Conversely enough, while Bob Weir saved the previous album from utter oblivion, he almost sank this album by contributing to the eclecticism with a couple of really lame Eagles-light Southern California soft rock fluff. This is Weir at his worst. Weir at his worst, nevertheless, does not stop the overall charm of Shakedown Street, as it showed the band getting back to their freewheeling, musically adventurous form. One thing to note, the making of this album was a very troubled one. On the 10th anniversary of Anthem of the Sun, the Dead's most drug-addled album, the making of Shakedown Street was rife with drug use by various band members and entourage, with cocaine being the main item on the menu. Hey, it's the late 1970s, baby. What can I say? Lowell George himself was struggling with cocaine addiction at the time and would die from a
A year later.
cocaine-induced
Yeah.
heart attack. Yeah, a year later. Garcia, who had started smoking heroin during the middle of the decade, was on his way to being a full-blown junkie and would see his situation deteriorate by the early 1980s. The Gotcho husband and wife tandem, backup singer Donna Jean and keyboardist Keith, were going through serious marital problems and were both going through alcohol and drug issues. They would break up and get kicked out of the band by the following year. So,
Hey,
yeah,
good work, Ace. Yeah.
there was some drama behind Shakedown Street, but there's some great music, though. My standout tracks, hey, we still got the songs, right? The title track, Shakedown Street, gives birth to the newest facet of the band's musical identity, Disco Dead.
Oh, yeah.
And boy, do I love me some Disco Dead with its groovalicious bass line and Garcia's pulsating wah-wah pedaled riff. Shakedown Street is hands down one of the 5 or 10 greatest disco rock hybrids ever recorded. Right
Oh,
up
yeah.
there, right up there with Blondie's Heart of Glass and the Rolling Stones' Miss You, all having come out the same year in 1978, and 1 year before Kiss's I Was Made for Loving You back in
Oh, yeah.
1979.
Yeah, really cleverly arranged record. Or song. But like Mickey Hart and Phil Lesh are having
Sure.
a lot of fun on that.
Oh,
on
yeah.
that song.
And perhaps, in my opinion, the Dead's greatest ever reggae track is on this record with the majestic Fire on the Mountain,
Oh, yeah.
one of the Dead's concert highlights during this period. Even the weirdo drum excursions of Mickey Hart and Bill Kreutzmann, particularly in Serengeti, work in the overall tapestry of a mostly terrific record.
Yeah, this record is very, very strong for a few reasons. This is Mickey Hart's finest hour with the Dead. There's just there's just touches, and like obviously Fire on the Mountain, which became like a huge staple through the rest of the band's history. From its side, it was just basically it was a highlight of their shows. That's a Mickey Hart and Robert Hunter collaboration. Great song, like you said, very strong kind of reggae backbone for that. Obviously, Hart's there's calypso drum that shows up in France, which is a Mickey Hart touch. There's Serengeti. There's obviously a big influence on Shakedown Street, with the rhythms there. So I think that this is kind of Hart's record. The other fascinating thing about this record is Lowell George's contribution to it. You mentioned this. Now, here's a baseline for like the travels and the evolution and the sort of the changing of the times with the Dead. On their self-titled debut from '67, one of the better songs, and it's on the second side, is New Morningwood Blues, which is a cover of an old Noah Lewis jug band blues song. And they played it, they ramped it up very strong, just sort of like really energetic, kind of unhinged playing from Garcia. Pigpen's organ is very, very, noticeable and kind of helps drive the song. And it's, basically it's an acid and weed party song. It's kind of like an underground San Francisco party scene song. Well, on this record, it appears again as all new Morningwood Blues. And now it's gone from the weed and acid party song to the cocaine party song. and you can tell this is Lowell George. This is where the little feetness shows up the most. Just this really strong, really great guitar. It's Garcia's best, like his nastiest guitar playing on the entire record is there. And just, drums right up in the mix, nice piano touches from Gotcho, and it has that kind of patented Lowell George stomp, kind of clap and stomp that made his stuff so great. And so just to see, the two versions of it and the kind of the bookends that's pretty fascinating to me as well. And like you said, Disco Dead, gotta love them. But at least now the real good Disco Dead is here now to show the world that they really truly were thinking about and really wanted to be Disco Dead. all you have to do is look at the cover of the next record we're going to talk about,
Oh, yeah.
which is one of the funniest covers of all time.
Yeah. Go to Heaven from 1980.
Yep.
At the time of its release, Go to Heaven was panned by critics and a substantial part of the Grateful Dead's fan base for being overly commercial and processed, a notion certainly not helped, in fact, most likely informed by the then dismal but now hilarious album cover with the members of the Dead smiling in front of the camera, wearing matching white disco suits with a white background and the image completely embalmed in gloss. Ooh, baby.
Yeah.
However, time has proven rather kind to this record, as it contains some more than its share of excellent tracks. Jerry Garcia only brought in 2 songs from the Garcia-Hunter partnership, but they're the 2 best songs on the whole album. Alabama Getaway rocks with a force that updates Creedence Clearwater Revival's swamp rock for the new wave era. And Althea is a late period Garcia-Hunter masterpiece, whereas the light funk of Franklin's Tower was high. The light funk of Althea is down to a mid-tempo swampy low, with Hunter's lyrics about feeling emotionally lost and stranded. They might as well have been about Garcia's troubled life at the time, his relationship issues, his drug issues, etc. After seemingly forever, the band finally record their rollicking, stomping cover of the old folk standard "Don't Ease Me In," and a song that had been a regular part of their concert repertoire for years. And hey, Bob Weir actually does not have the crappy commercial songs on this album.
No, he does not.
That distinction goes to the 2 shit sandwiches on this record that belong to the Dead's newest keyboard member at the time, Brent Midland, who was a terrific musician, a fine keyboard player who meshed well with the band's improvisational live sound, and quite a soulful backup singer. But by God, was he an awful songwriter. With turds like Easy to Love You and Far From Me, you can already tell by the song titles.
Yeah.
His originals are straight up corny California soft rock from the school of Michael McDonald and the Doobie Brothers. This would be like if by the end of the 1990s, Fish decided to allow Brooks and Dunn to join the band and write songs. It's that bad.
Yeah.
That should not dissuade anyone, though, from appreciating the acquired taste gifts this album has to offer.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like Brett Midland, like the most slickly produced songs on the record are from him. Well, the guy who produced the record also produced a couple of Foreigner records around the same time. I think he produced Foreigner 4, which was basically made and released around the same time. So go figure. Yeah, this record is actually, like you said, it's half and half. By this is the kind of the edge where, like we said, in 74, it started not to matter if they did good music or not.
Yeah.
By 80, it really didn't matter. Now they managed to crank out one last classic, Althea, which you mentioned. I think it's an extraordinary lyric. It's kind of up there with those, Dylan had these kind of great, like kind of back and forth kind of dialogue-y larks, Frankie Lee and Judas Priest and Isis and songs like that. I think it's kind of up there. And like you said, I think that the person or the dude that Althea is addressing was probably Hunter's way. It was kind of a way of conveying his concerns for Garcia's deterioration. In some ways, that's obvious. Rolling Stone did an article in 2020 where they got everybody together, including, I think, David Brown and all their Dead experts, to make a list of the 50 greatest Dead or Garcia Hunter songs of all time.
Yeah.
And that song, Althea, is number 20, which I believe is that's the highest ranking album from the 80s on, or the highest ranking song, excuse me. And it's like that their last great masterpiece. It really just has this, like I said, this nice bluesy feel, like really sort of sweet playing by Garcia, great singing, and it's mesmerizing. It's a really it's a 7-minute song that feels like it's 17, but also not too long.
Right,
you
right,
know,
right.
so it's basically a perfect song. Alabama Getaway is fun. I think it's lightweight. I don't like it as much as you do. I don't really see that. And then I think that, yeah, there's some amusing stuff. I think that the Mickey Hart Kreutzmann thing is their worst. On what that they do here, it's really really cheesy. So, yeah, basically what, like 9 song record, like 2 really good songs, maybe 1 or 2 so ones. There's a really fun one by Bob Weir on there. Um, but yeah, the rest of it is garbage. And this is where we're going to stop, because this is kind of where they, like you said, because of the drugs, because of all the, they were starting to really kind of fall off. And so the last 2 records they did come in 1987 and 1989, pieces of shit. And
Although I will admit that I have a big soft spot in my heart for Touch of Grey. That is a
oh,
great
I do too.
single.
Oh, I do
Um,
too. I mean,
but yeah,
I grew up on that.
yeah,
Yeah.
but in the Dark is a really bad album from '87, and Built to Last from '89 may be the worst Dead album ever.
Yeah.
Way too much Brett Midland.
Yeah, I was going to say, at least he was sober enough to write songs at that point. But that made him distinct in that band. Maybe, I don't
Well, he
know.
wasn't, because he died of an overdose by '90. So
Oh, okay.
so
Well, hey,
so yeah.
he fooled me. I mean, it doesn't. Yeah, you can be coherent and fucked up. So there you
Right,
go.
yeah.
So,
Uh,
yeah. So if you're gonna kind of summarize the journey at the beginning of the decade, they're at their most ambitious. They're able to road test these songs. They're able to bring in that confidence and capture that in. By the end of the decade, they're kind of a petering out train, but still, even on this record, they pump out Althea. So they never produced a record that was a complete dud and a complete, okay, we're going to put that back in the mothballs and nothing, there's no goodness that comes out of it. They never got to that point. And I
yeah,
think that makes them
thankfully for
special.
that.
Yeah.
Unlike a lot of their peers from the 1960s and 70s, who suffered through that acute disease called '80s itis.
Yeah.
All you have to look at Bob Dylan, see Neil Young, see Joni Mitchell, and on and on
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. They all kind of fell off. And so I'd like to kind of end this is a 2-part episode. This has been fun. Let me quiz you, Art. So,
Yeah,
this is 12 albums total that we covered.
yeah.
Which one of those albums is the best album?
American Beauty, hands down.
Yeah, American Beauty. I was just seeing if you would divert from that.
Yeah.
Uh, best song on. Okay, let's do it. Best Garcia Hunter song
For
from
me,
the.
Franklin's Tower.
Yeah, and I would say Stella Blue. Uh, best Bob Weir song.
Mm, Sugar Magnolia.
Yeah, I would either say that, or frankly,
Or
music never.
Estimated Profit.
Or yeah,
Estimated Profit.
and I would personally say the music never stopped. It's kind of tricky because Sugar Magnolia is co-written with Garcia and Hunter, so that's not
Right.
quite.
Sure.
Yeah, there's that.
I love the goofiness of Samson and Delilah, so I'm always gonna
Yeah, yeah,
I'm always gonna wave my hand for that one.
gotcha. And then the song that you think captures the essence of Garcia's playing the best and the most.
The one that captured the essence of his guitar playing the best and the most, I would say Eyes of the World.
Yeah, to me, yeah, it's a toss up for me. I think it's, if you're going to go on those 12 records, I would say either Slipknot or frankly Althea. I mean,
Maybe.
there's a couple, but I like Slipknot, and yeah, there's a couple of others. I think actually Truckin' is a pretty
Mm,
good
yeah.
Garcia
Yeah.
song there. So yeah, there's that, and then obviously Phil Lesh, great bassist, and so when I
Mm.
think of his bass, I think of Addicts of My Life. What would you think of?
Phil Lesh, Box of Rain, best song he ever wrote.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. So, there's that. And best cover. I would vote
Ooh,
Good Lovin' by
maybe
the Rascals,
could
by the
be.
Young Rascals.
I might go with that one too because their covers when they did covers they were best done live, not in the
Yeah.
studio.
Right. And if it's not Good Lovin', and then it's probably Morning Dew on the debut.
Yeah, Morning Dew on the debut for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Gotcha. And
That would be my pick.
any other trivial categories, lightning round categories I forgot?
Garcia Garcia at his best and most playful. Shakedown Street.
Yeah. Oh no, I would definitely say that. And then in some ways, estimated profit might work there because of that
Maybe.
how clever that is. But
Yeah.
no, yeah, definitely Shakedown Street, maybe even Alabama Getaway. That's kind of
Yeah.
that's kind of him. It is kind of like most showy, you know, for sure.
Autobiographical note on Alabama Getaway in spring of 1996. I saw Bob Dylan at the Landmark Theater in Syracuse, New York,
Yes.
and he played his version. He played a version of Alabama Getaway where Dylan took the lead guitar and the lead guitar solo, and it was terrible.
you
It was
don't
awful.
you don't say.
Dylan never was a lead guitar player. He
Nope.
tried to evoke Jerry Garcia and he botched it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And yeah, so this has been a really interesting exercise. I would say that the most surprising song in the catalog to me is Saint Stephen.
Yeah,
That because in the kind of the depths that it reaches and how it's structured, and not only that, but when you're going through it linearly, going from Anthem to the Sun, which is basically just a big old splotch,
yeah,
then Saint Stephen, which is this really clever, organized, kind of almost like laid back hippie Shel Silverstein
yeah,
type of thing with like just like great playing and like great little kind of sideline sections and all of this. It's really good. So
yeah.
so there you go, folks. That's a little bit more color to summarize these. Any final thoughts on our deadology there, Arturo?
I think we pretty much nailed them all, and I would like to let it be known that we're done with the Grateful Dead, but in a way, kind of not, because in the next episode we are going to talk about a band probably single-handedly most responsible for keeping the Grateful Dead spirit and legacy of improvisational jam music on stage and just the overall spirit and of the band and the soul of the band going into the end of the 20th century and into the 21st century. And yes, folks, we are going to defend the legacy of none other than Fish.
Yes, which I think is easy to do, or at least easier than you might think. Why? To set that up, when the Dead did their 50th anniversary show in Chicago, guess who played Garcia?
One
Mr. Trey,
guess.
Mr. Trey Anastasio. And
Yeah.
guess who? Guess how Anastasio tuned his guitars to model
Garcia's
Garcia's
tunings.
perfectly. And so
Yeah.
that ought to set that up. On that note, folks, you can always reach out to us with thoughts and musings at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. We have our Facebook community, the Curmudgeonly community. Look for some new content out there. We have Spotify playlists, and there's some stuff lined up there. And so, yes, we're looking to convert acolytes to our and new entrants into our community. So exciting times there, folks. And like what we're going to be doing going forward, look out for if you are a Spotify subscriber, look out for a Spotify playlist that is not going to be real clever. It's just going to take all 7 of these records, paste them in there, and there you go as an accompaniment. And so with that, rock on, folks. We'll definitely see you in 2 weeks.